Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtadrishya Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtadrishya Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. All glories to the sum of devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the sum of devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the sum of devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 4, Text number 21. Yad Angri Abhidhyana Samadhi Dautaya Dhyanupashyanti Hi Tadvam Atmanaha Vadanti Chaitat Kavayo Yata Rucham Sa Me Mukundo Bhagavan Prasidatam Yadangriya Bidhyana Samadhi Dotaya Dhyanupashyanti Tadvamatmanaha Vadanti Chaitat Kavayo Yitarucham Same Mukundo Bhagavan Prasidatam Yadangriya Bidhyana Samadhi Dotaya Dhyanupashyanti Tadvamatmanaha Vadanti Chaitat Kavayo Yitarucham Same Mukundo Bhagavan Prasidatam Yadangriya Bidhyana Samadhi Dhautya Dhyanupashyanti Tadvamatmanaha Vadanti Chaitat Kavayo Yutarucham Same Mukundo Bhagavan Prasidatam. Please repeat. Yadangri Bidhyana Samadhi Dhautya
Bhagavan. 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 Varanti chaitat kavayo yatha rucham. Same mukundo bhagavan prasidata. Virabhijana samahirautaya. Dhiyanu pasyanti tattvamatmana. Varanti chaitat kavayo yatha rucham. Same mukundo bhagavan prasidata.
Matajis? Dhyana samadhi dhotya dhyanu pashyanti tattvamatmanah vadanti chaitat kavayo yataracham same mukundo bhagavan prasidatam. Vidhyana samadhi dhotya dhyanu pashyanti tattvamatmanah vadanti chaitat kavayo yataracham same mukundo bhagavan prasidatam. Yadangriya vidhyana samadhi dhotya dhyanu pashyanti tattvamatmanah vadanti chaitat kavayo yataracham same mukundo bhagavan prasidatam. Yat angri, whose lotus feet? Abhidhyana, thinking of at every second. Samadhi, trance. Dhautaya, being washed off. Dhiya, by such clean intelligence. Anupashyanti, the see by following authorities. He, certainly. Tattvam, the absolute truth. Atmanaha, of the Supreme Lord and of oneself. Vadanti, they say. Cha, also. Etat, this. Kavayaha, philosophers or learned scholars. Yataracham, as he thinks. Saha, he. Me, mine. Mukundaha, Lord Krishna who gives liberation. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Prasidatam, be pleased with me. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. It is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who gives liberation. By thinking of his lotus feet at every second, following in the footsteps of authorities, the devotee in trance can see the absolute truth. The learned mental speculators, however, think of him according to their whims. May the Lord be pleased with me. Purport. The mystic yogis, after a strenuous effort to control the senses, may be situated in a trance of yoga just to have a vision of the supersoul within everyone. But the pure devotee, simply by remembering the Lord's lotus feet at every second, one becomes established in a real trance, because by such realization his mind and intelligence are completely cleansed of the diseases of material enjoyment. The pure devotee thinks himself fallen into the ocean of birth and death, and incessantly prays to the Lord to lift him up. He only aspires to become a speck of transcendental dust at the lotus feet of the Lord. The pure devotee, by the grace of the Lord, absolutely loses all attraction from material enjoyment. And to keep free from contamination, he always thinks of the lotus feet of the Lord. King Kulashekar, a great devotee of the Lord, prayed, Krishna tvadiya padapangaja panjarantam adyeva me vishatu manasa raja hamsaha prana prayana samaye kapavata pitahi kantavarodhana vitos maranam kutaste. My Lord Krishna, I pray that the swan of my mind may immediately sink down to the stems of the lotus feet of your lordship and be locked in their network. Otherwise, at the time of my final breath, when my throat is choked up with cough, how will it be possible? How will it be possible to think of you? There's an intimate relationship between the swan and the lotus stem. So the comparison is very appropriate. Without becoming a swan or a paramahamsa, one cannot enter into the network of the lotus feet of the Lord. As stated in the Brahma-samhita, the mental speculators, even by dint of learned scholarship, cannot even dream of the absolute truth by speculating over it for eternity. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to such mental speculators. And because they cannot enter into the network stem of the lotus feet of the Lord, all mental speculators differ in conclusions. And at the end, they make useless compromise by saying as many conclusions as many ways, according to one's own inclination, yathartham. But the Lord is not like a shopkeeper trying to please all sorts of customers in the mental speculator exchange. The Lord is what He is, the absolute personality of Godhead, and He demands absolute surrender unto Him only. The pure devotee, however, following the ways of the previous acharyas or authorities, can see the Supreme Lord through the transparent medium of a bona fide spiritual master, anupashyanti. The pure devotee never tries to see the Lord by mental speculation, but by following in the footsteps of the acharyas, mahajano yena gatasa pantaha. Therefore, there is no difference of the conclusions amongst the Vaishnava acharyas regarding the Lord and the devotees. Lord Chaitanya asserts that the living entity, Jiva, is eternally the servitor of the Lord, and that he is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. This tattva of Lord Chaitanya is shared by all four sampradayas of the Vaishnava school, all accepting the eternal servitude of the Lord even after salvation. And there is no authorized Vaishnava acharya who may think of the Lord and himself as one. This humbleness of the pure devotee who is 100% engaged in his service puts the devotee of the Lord in a trance by which to realize everything. Because to the sincere devotee of the Lord reveals himself as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 10:10. The Lord, being the Lord of intelligence in everyone, even in the non-devotee, favors his devotee with proper intelligence so that automatically the pure devotee is enlightened with the factual truth about the Lord and his different energies. The Lord is revealed not by one's speculative power or by one's verbal jugglery over the absolute truth. Rather, he reveals himself to a devotee when he is fully satisfied with the devotee's service attitude. Shukadeva Goswami is not a mental speculator or compromiser of the theory as many ways as many conclusions. Rather, he prays to the Lord only, evoking his transcendental pleasure. That is the way of knowing the Lord. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gnanjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Inam Putale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandiham Shri Guru Shri Tapatakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnamam Shri Rupam Sagarjatam Sagana Rakanatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shiva Shakan Vitam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagadpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhi Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhanustate Devi Pranamami Hare Pre Vanshakapatubhya Kripasanubhi Bhaja Patita Nam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putale Shmati Bhakti Vikas Swamiti Namane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putale Shmati Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prasharne Nirvashesha Shunavani Pashtati Adeshadarne Bhutir Mahadbiri Mafpuro Vibor Nirnamaya Shitiya the Mushu Purashaha Bhungti Gunan Shudasha Shudashadmakaha Solang Kashista Bhagavan Vachamsime. So this very beautiful verse, again it's coming in Shukadeva Goswami's prayers, and he's adding in these particular set of prayers, he's adding some sort of alankar, some sort of poetic element. He's saying this Same Makundo Bhagavan Prasidatam. So he's saying this in multiple in different ways. Prasidatam me Bhagavan Satam Patihi, Vitarka Lingo Bhagavan Prasidatam. He's repeating the same thing, just as he was repeating in previous verses, Tasmai Prabhavi Shudinti Tasmai Prabhavishnave Namaha. So you can see the poetry inlaid with these prayers, even though I'm not such a, I don't know so much about Sanskrit poetry. It's very just the just hearing the sound vibration of these of the Sanskrit here is very nice. So Shukadeva Goswami, he says here, so he's glorifying the lotus feet of the Lord. He's saying it is the personality of God as Sri Krishna who gives liberation, referring to him as Mukunda. By thinking of his lotus feet at every second, following the footsteps of authorities, the devotee in trance can see the absolute truth. The learned mental speculators, however, think of him according to their whims. May the Lord be pleased with me. So there's a few different points. Srila Prabhupada brings out a lot of points in the purport. The first and primary point that stands out to me, well, Srila Prabhupada begins his purport by that. He says the mystic yogis, after a strenuous effort to control the senses, they may be situated in a trance just to have a vision of the supersoul within everyone. But the pure devotee, simply by remembering the Lord's lotus feet at every second, at once becomes established in real trance, because by such realization, his mind and intelligence are completely cleansed of the diseases of material enjoyment. So immediately we can see a difference between the process of Krishna consciousness and the stereotyped, trite idea of samadhi or trance, of fixing oneself in some sort of, whatever it may be, some sort of impersonal state, some yogic posture, or even if there's some proper conception there, even up to the point of the supersoul, by attaining some vision of the supersoul through mystic yoga, etc. But the process of trance for the devotee is completely different. The process of attaining samadhi for a devotee is completely dependent upon the Lord's mercy and is entirely dependent upon simply concentrating the mind upon the Lord. Therefore, there's verses like Shriman Grinnan Smarasmaniyam Shachintiyan Namani Rupani Shamangalani Te Kriyasu Yestwach Charanara Vendur Avishtashitan Nabhavaya Kalpate. So the demigods, they famously pray that anyone who is engaged in multiple different activities, kriyasu, but at the same time they go on remembering your lotus feet, they're situated on the transcendental platform, and they're actually engaged in samadhi. Whereas these mystic yogis, technically, they've attained some sort of stage of samadhi. Samadhi is defined in different ways, but the highest, just as liberation is defined in different ways. There's different tiers of liberation, but the highest form of samadhi is concentration on the lotus feet of the Lord. And we see that expressed here in Bhagavatam. So this is very easily attained for the devotee. It's very easily attained, and at the same time, it takes time to attain. Immediately, we can start thinking of the lotus feet of Krishna, to attain that constant state, that samadhi, that equal intelligence, then we have to, it takes time in devotional service. That this constant remembrance of the lotus feet of the Lord, it takes time, and it's, of course, the service is there, but the active smartanam, the active remembrance, it automatically arises after some time. So as we go on in devotional service, this naturally, Srila Prabhupada would explain so many times that Shravanam and Kirtanam, which are the basis of devotional service, naturally, they lead to the other processes. So naturally, from from Shravanam and Kirtanam comes Smartanam, like this. So Srila Prabhupada continues his purport, and he says, the pure devotee thinks himself fallen in the ocean of birth and death, and incessantly prays to the Lord to lift him up. So he quotes like this, the pure devotee. So one interesting point: the pure devotee by the grace of the Lord, absolutely loses all attraction for material enjoyment, and to keep free from contamination, he always thinks of the lotus feet of the Lord. So a very important point here throughout this whole purport, practically in verse and practically all of Shukadeva Goswami's prayers, is the necessity of the lotus, is the necessity of the mercy of the Lord. Specifically here in so many different ways. It's by the mercy of the Lord that it's by Krishna's mercy we can understand Krishna. It's by Krishna's mercy that we get a bona fide spiritual master. It's by Krishna's mercy that even we can execute mundane things. Srila Prabhupada quotes in the purport that he's the Lord of the intelligence, and I think he quotes this Tesham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam. I think that's the one he's quoting, Tintin. And so he says there, Dadami buddhi yogam tamina mam upayantite. That he gives the intelligence. He gives the intelligence not only for the devotees, also gives the intelligence for the non-devotees. Everything is coming from him. Hamsarvasya Prabhu. So, so this is there. But specifically, here, the pure devotee, unlike others who may practice so many different austerities, well, I mean, what to speak of, what to speak of Mayavadis and impersonalists, even karmis, they undertake so many different austerities to to keep free from this sort of sense gratification or that. Some people, just like some people, they're addicted to alcohol, and so they'll go through great austerities to get free from that addiction. Some people, they have so many different things are there. And on the spiritual platform, or coming to the spiritual platform, Mayavadis and impersonalists, they execute so many different austerities, and they forcibly separate themselves from the object of the senses. But we see here the pure devotee, simply by the grace of the Lord, absolutely loses all attraction for material enjoyment. So, by the grace of Lord Krishna, immediately all of our material desires can be vanquished to nil. It's just a question of, just as Prabhupada famously said in Melbourne, you can become Krishna conscious even within a moment. It's just a question of sincerity. So, yes, by the grace of the Lord, absolutely, he loses all attraction for material enjoyment immediately. It's stated in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, at least it's quoted there. I'm not sure from what literature, that Smeram bhangi parichitam sachi vistirna drishtim kamshi sachi nistararam kishalam ujvaram chandrakena yet keshi tirto upakante maprakshita tavayadi sakubandi stirangaha. So, essentially, Srila Prabhupada actually, he framed this verse. He had this verse framed in his Haight Ashbury Temple in 1967 by Yamuna Mataji. Now, as he was giving class, he would look at it constantly. So this verse is pretty famous. The essence of it is that, my dear friend, do not look upon the form of Lord Govind, who is standing in a threefold bent form, standing at Keshi Ghat. If you have any attraction for your worldly friends, because the implication is by looking at him, immediately you'll lose all care for this material world. So it's a very nice verse, but at the same time, Rupa Goswami, he cites this verse as an evidence that immediately, just by looking upon, if you take the verse itself, what's being said is, just by looking upon the form of Krishna, immediately we can lose all material desires. So that potency is there. It's just our own willingness, or our own attitude towards devotional service and towards sense gratification as well. So Srila Prabhupada citing this prayer. So this is the prayer of the pure devotee, to always praying for the Lord to lift him up. Just as, in a sense, Shukadeva Goswami is doing here and throughout other prayers in the Bhagavatam. The same thread runs through all of them. So, one of the great Alwars, Prabhupada would quote this verse so many different times. This is from the Mukunda Mala Stotra. Srila Prabhupada, he would quote one or two, but prominently he would quote this one. This Krishna Tvadiya Padapangaja Panjarantam. That may Lord, King Kulashekar, he's praying to Lord Krishna, as I've read. He's praying that that he may immediately die while he can still remember Lord Krishna. Because he thinks that at the time of death, when his throat is choked up by mucus, bile, and air, the three Ayurvedic elements, that he will be unable to think of Krishna and to utter the name of Krishna. So he prays for this benediction. But, so this is a very elevated example of the mood of a devotee and a proper mood of prayer. So Srila Prabhupada elaborates here. There's an intimate relationship between the swan and the lotus stem. So the comparison is very appropriate. Without becoming a swan or a paramahamsa, no one can enter into the network stems of the lotus feet of the Lord. As stated in the Brahma Samhita, the mental speculators, even by dint of learned scholarship, cannot even dream of the absolute truth by speculating over it for eternity. Do you know how this verse starts? Bhukoti shatavatsara sampramagyo vayoratopi manasu muni pungavanam something yat prada sopiasti yat prapadya achintya tadve govindamari purusham tamaham vajami. I'm missing a word there, but anyway. So we see that unless you're a pure devotee of the Lord, you can't understand any, as in the poetic language Srila Prabhupada uses here, you can't enter into the lotus stem of the lotus, the network stem of the lotus feet of the Lord. In other words, we can't understand anything about the Lord. Just like we see in the third, is that the third? Second or third canto? The third canto, definitely, actually. That Lord Brahma, when the universe was first manifested, and Lord Brahma was alone in the universe, just all by himself, he himself actually was sitting on his lotus flower, and he was trying to trace out where from he came, and he went down the stalk of the lotus flower, trying to trace out its origin, but he was going on and on and on for what seemed eternity, and finally he gave up his effort. And then, as the narration goes, then he heard the sound vibration tapa, meaning austerity, and he took the note from it that he should undergo austerities. And so, by undergoing austerities and by his process of austerities, and by ultimately, we can presume accepting the process of devotional service in some way, that he was able to see Lord Krishna face to face. It said there, I think that comes in the second canto. But anyway, where it comes is after the Chatur Shloki Bhagavatam, actually. It said there that Lord Brahma, he shakes hands with the Lord, actually. So this is the result. Initially, he was unable to trace out even the stalk of the lotus stem, the origin of existence, which ultimately is coming back to Mahavishnu. But by process of devotional service, by his austerities, he was able to personally see the Lord face to face and shake his hand. So this is the difference that's being highlighted here. Srila Prabhupada is bringing out, and Shukadeva Goswami. Just like we're reading today in the morning, we're learning this verse. So one of the names is that of Lord Krishna, he is, or descriptions, he's Vidura Kashtaya. Namo namaste stvurashabhaya sattvatam, Vidura Kashtaya muhoko yoginam. He's always a problem for the non-devotees, Srila Prabhupada, he translates as. But specifically, in the word for word, this Vidura Kashtaya, it means he's always very far from the mundane wranglers. He can't be attained by them. Just as the Brahma Samhita is stating, Shukadeva Goswami, he stated the same thing. He reserves the right, Lord Krishna, of not being exposed to anyone and everyone. He says this in Bhagavad Gita, to anyone and everyone, and he's not subjected to anyone's mental speculation. Just as, as Srila Prabhupada almost humorously, he says here, the mental speculators, they differ in their conclusions, and at the end, they make a useless compromise saying, as many conclusions as in many ways. That means you don't know, so you throw your hands up, according to one's own inclination. And so Srila Prabhupada, he says, but the Lord is not like a shopkeeper trying to please all sorts of customers in the mental speculator exchange. He is what he is, the absolute personality of God, and he demands absolute surrender unto him only. So in other words, there's a path for understanding Krishna, as not that Jatamat Tatopat, there's as many paths, as many ways, that everything, all roads lead to Rome, that you can execute anything and you can get to the same path. Just as Srila Prabhupada, he will explain many times, actually. It's just like if you purchase a ticket for going to Delhi, you can't expect to arrive in Berlin. It doesn't make sense. So similarly, too, there's a process. Just as there's a process for getting from one place to Delhi, there's a process for attaining the lotus feet of Krishna. And that's described in many different places throughout the Bhagavatam and Gita as well. Famously, Bhaktya Mama Bijananti Yavanyashtasmi Tattavataha Tatumam Tattavato Gyatva Vishati Tadanantaram. Only by undivided devotional service can I be attained, O Arjuna. The same thing is explained in the Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, the Sri Uddhava. There, another semi-famous verse, at least the acharyas that quote it often. Bhaktyaham ekagrahya shuddhayatma priya satam bhakti punanti mam nishta shwa pakan abhisambhavat. So the same thing in different language. Lord Krishna, he tells Uddhava, only by practicing unalloyed devotional service with full faith in me can one attain me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am naturally dear to the devotees, who take me as their only goal, the only goal of their loving service. By engaging in such pure devotional service, even the dog eaters can purify themselves for the contamination of their low birth. And in the next verse, he says, neither religious activities endowed with honesty and mercy, nor knowledge obtained with great penance can completely purify one's consciousness if they are bereft of loving service to me. So Srila Prabhupada, he would explain the same thing. There's one purport in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I'll just paraphrase, I don't know exactly. He says something to the effect that everything that goes on in this world under the different guises of religion, economic development, philanthropic work, educational initiatives, biblical codes, etc. All of this is just different forms of sense gratification. And we can't understand, we can come to the platform of understanding who is Krishna and what is transcendence just by these mundane processes. Just as Srila Prabhupada is quoting here, Mahajano Yinagata Sapantaha, so Tarko Pratishta Shutuyo Vibinam, Nasa Vrishir Yasya Napinam, what is that? Dharma Tatvam Nitam Shakuhayam Mahajano Yinakata Sapantaha. The dry arguments are inconclusive. One philosopher differs from another. The real import of what is Dharma or real religion is manifest and shown and is contained within the heart of a pure devotee. Therefore, the process is given here in this verse, or in Mahabharata, it's in Mahajano Yinakata Sapantaha. And by the same thing in this verse today, that Dhyanu Pashyanti, Shukadev Goswami says. So by following in the Anupashyanti, by following in the footsteps of the authorities, we can properly attain the lotus feet of Krishna. Just as the demigods, they similarly pray in the, let me see, in the 11th canto, 2nd chapter, they pray. Well, there's many different verses there, actually. But this, they pray there, Swayam Sumatirya Sudustaram Duman, Bhavar Navam Bhima Adaprasuridaha, Bhavat Paramburuha Navamatrete, Nidhaye Sad Anugraho Bhavan. That, my dear, O Lord, Srila Prabhupada gives this translation, who resemble the shining sun. You are always ready to fulfill the desire of your devotee, and therefore you are known as a desire tree, Vanchakalpaturu. When acharyas completely take shelter of your lotus feet in order to cross the fierce ocean of nescience, they leave behind on earth the method by which they cross. And because you are very merciful to your other devotees, you accept this method to help them. So and then there's, let me see if I have it pulled up. I don't have it pulled up, but it's something like Tvai Ambujakshakila Satvadhamni, Samadhina Vishita Chitta Sakit, Tvat Pada Putina Mahat Kritena, Kodavantigo Vatsa Param Vavabdim. So the important point is this, that so the demigods, they pray that, my dear Lord, so many authorities in the past, they've taken shelter of your lotus feet, and they've previously crossed the ocean of material existence. Because they've, specifically by taking shelter, they say they're boarding the boat of your lotus feet. So the same thing is echoed in today's verse, that by taking advantage and thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord constantly, so similarly too, we can attain the mercy of the Lord of Mukunda. Same Mukundo Bhagavan Prasidatam. By attaining the Lord of Mukunda, easily liberation is gained. So the demigods there as well, they pray that Mahat Kritena. So this process of accepting the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord was previously done, Mahat Kritena, Srila Prabhupada translates there, as it was previously done by many great pure devotees. Just as Krishna, he says the same thing in the Bhagavad Gita. The Sanskrit isn't coming to me, but he says previously in the past, many great sages and saints took shelter in me, and they also attain liberation for the pangs of old age, disease, and death, something like this. So by following the path that is chalked out by our acharyas, we can very easily, just as I previously explained, just like we can easily satisfy the Lord by offering those prayers by the pure devotees, by following the path given by the acharyas, we can easily satisfy the Lord. Krishna consciousness, in one sense, is it can be very complicated if you make it complicated. And the philosophy can be as complex as you desire it to be, or it can be as simple as you desire it to be. Just Srila Prabhupada, who explained often in lectures that he would say, what is the difficulty? Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Patram Pushpam Param Toyom Yomi Bhakta Prayachiti. What is it? Bhakta. How does it start? Tadaham Bhakti Aparitam Ashnami Prayatmanaha. So Krishna says, I'm easily satisfied just by offerings of fruits, flowers, leaves, etc. like this. And anybody can offer these things. Krishna is very easily pleased as long as we follow the process of devotional service. He is, I was just reading actually in one place that Srila Prabhupada will quote part of this verse, but it's stated in one Purana, that I think Padma Purana, is stated that one may be a fool or one may be very intelligent, but it doesn't matter to the Lord because He is Bhavagraho Janardana. He accepts the sentiment of the devotee. He accepts the intention of the devotee. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he explained in relation to this verse that one may be very intelligent, very scholarly, and he may be able to present the philosophy in so many different ways, or he may be an outright fool, he may be illiterate. But for the Lord, He doesn't recognize these things. He simply accepts the sentiment of a devotee, as is being echoed here, that one may be, in the purport somewhere Srila Prabhupada says, he may be very expert, an expert wrangler, very expert in juggling Vedic mantras, juggling juggling philosophy and mentally speculating like this, but it doesn't mean that he can capture Krishna. The real thing that captures Krishna is the sentiment and the devotion in the heart of a devotee towards his Lord. As we see in so many different cases throughout the Bhagavatam, practically every Leela and pastime is, you can, particularly 10th canto, we see this. The gopis, as Srila Prabhupada again explained, they weren't very expert scholars. We don't ever hear of the gopis studying the Vedas. But at the same time, they were completely expert in the Vedas because they understood the Vedashta Sarvayarhameva Vidyaha. They understood the end goal of the Vedas. We see that the Yogyapatis in the 10th canto, the wives of the Brahmanas, who left and then gave foodstuffs to Krishna and Balaram, they're more glorified than their husbands who knew the Vedas, who were engaging in Brahminical activities of yogya, etc. like this. And this was a previous yuga as well. So the Brahmanas were of a very higher caliber than today. Presumably, at least they knew one or multiple Vedas. But still, because they lacked that, because they were Bahir Mukha and not Sevan Mukha, it was the Yogyapatis who were glorified rather than the Brahmanas. So the point is this, that we should turn our face towards the lotus feet of the Lord, and then we can properly understand the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada gives one point here that there's no difference in relation to following the footsteps of the acharyas. He says there's no difference between the conclusions amongst the Vaishnava acharyas regarding the Lord and the devotee. Lord Chaitanya asserts that the living entity, Jiva, is eternally the servitor of the Lord, and that he is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. This tattva of Lord Chaitanya's is shared by all four sampradayas of the Vaishnava school, all accepting this eternal servitude to the Lord even after salvation. And there is no authorized Vaishnava acharya who may think of the Lord and himself as one. So a few important points in this sentence, that there's four different, I don't know them all often, Vishishta Dvaita, Shuddha Dvaita, there's two other ones as well. The four Vaishnava Sampradayas, they each have their own philosophy regarding the relation of the individual jiva to Ishwar, the Supreme Lord. But in essence, the conclusion is the same. They all accept the eternal servitude to the Lord even after liberation. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he described that this understanding of how the jiva relates to the Lord is understood in its fullest extent to the Chinta Beda Tattva philosophy that's given by Lord Chaitanya and elaborated on by Jiva Goswami. It's the most elaborate and most in-depth. The other ones aren't necessarily wrong. There's nothing wrong with one Vaishnavacharya giving a different understanding than another, but because the ultimate conclusion is the same. And over there, I believe he says, he mentions Shuddha Dvaita as being, whereas other ones, for example, the Dvaita Madhvacharya, he says the conclusion is correct, but it doesn't fully flesh out the details. But he says that Shuddha Dvaita is completely identical with the teachings of Achinta Bheda Bheda Tattva philosophy. So just an interesting point. So Srila Prabhupada, so no Vaishnava Acharya may think of himself as one with the Lord. It's an obvious point. If we've been studying Srila Prabhupada's books, we've heard this thousands of times again, that nobody, a Vaishnava will never accept, actually it's a fact, he'll never accept Kaivalya liberation. He'll never accept Sayuja or merging into the effulgence of the Lord. Vaishnavas will only accept Salokya, Sarupya, etc., the other four forms of liberation, only if it's favorable to the Lord's devotional service. But he thinks that this merging into the Lord is worse than a hellish condition. So there's so many, we may be reading it so many times, but actually it's a fact. There's so many people who present themselves as Vaishnavas, and then not so much here in America, some a little bit amongst the Sahaja groups, but particularly more in India, those who present themselves as Vaishnavas, and wear Vaishnava tilak, and even may have Kunti Mala on, and may even be chanting, even Hare Krishna they may chant. But their mentality at the end, or their conception, is that ultimately we merge into Brahman or Vishnu and we become one with him. So no real Vaishnava actually accepts this. Lord Chaitanya vehemently opposed this and vehemently rejected this idea. So Srila Prabhupada continuing, he says, this humbleness of the pure devotee who is 100% engaged in his service puts the devotee of the Lord in a trance by which to realize everything. Because to the sincere devotee of the Lord reveals himself, as say in the Bhagavad Gita, as I've quoted, the Lord being the Lord of intelligence in everyone, even in the non-devotee, favors his devotee with proper intelligence, so that automatically the pure devotee is enlightened with the factual truth about the Lord and his different energies. So he says, the Lord is not revealed by one's speculative power or by one's verbal jugglery over the absolute truth. Rather, he reveals himself to a devotee when he is fully satisfied by the devotee's service attitude. So this is a very important point, actually. This is repeated again and again and again in Srila Prabhupada's books, and he'll quote this verse, Artha Shri Krishna Namadi Nabhavid Grahim Indriyahi Sevan Mokhe Jivado Svayam Eva Spratyadaha. Srila Prabhupada is one of his, I think, at least top 20 quoted verses. He will quote this so many different times. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as well, this is one of his most quoted verses. And he said, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, that you should frame this verse and you should chant Harinam incessantly in front of it. Because it's in a sense, you could take it as the philosophy in a nutshell, that only by, as Srila Prabhupada is explaining here, Lord Krishna himself gives us realization. It's a very basic point, but many devotees seem to have, well, not many, but some, you'll see, they don't seem to understand this in many different ways. And that they think devotional service is something mechanical, and they'll go about it in a mechanical way, and they'll be thinking, if I chant so many different rounds, if I do this, if I chant this, if I do that, if I take this austerity, if I undergo chaturmas, if I, so many different things, then I'll become Krishna conscious. But Krishna consciousness isn't dependent upon some sort of mechanical practice, as has been explained. You can know the whole Bhagavad Gita, you can know the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. And some people actually do, well, maybe not the Bhagavatam, but at least the Gita. Some people have memorized all four Vedas. But it doesn't mean that, in other words, just because of some sort of mechanical arrangement of the mind, or mechanically undergoing some sort of, whatever it may be, austerity, this or that, it doesn't mean it doesn't automatically become equated with Krishna consciousness. Because the real thing is, as Srila Prabhupada says here, he reveals himself to a devotee when he is fully satisfied by the devotee's service attitude. So the real thing is the service attitude, the seva mukh. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, you see, he uses this word very, very often, actually. He will use this word bahir mukh, and he will use this word sevan mukh. Seva mukh simply means, mukh means like face or head, and seva means like service. So sevan mukh literally means one who has turned his face towards the service of the Lord, or in other words, who is inclined towards the service of the Lord Krishna and is not averse to it. So this comes out in many different ways, that the real thing is service attitude, not mechanical engagement. So somebody may be engaging in so many different mechanical services, or maybe doing famously or stereotyped is that somebody may be chanting so many rounds, and they may think that if I chant 64 rounds, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says in Chaitanya Bhagavat, I don't accept the offerings of anyone who doesn't chant a lack of names. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said you have to chant a lack of names. So they'll be trying to chant 1 lakh or 64 rounds of Hare Krishna. And in the process of doing so, they'll completely negate or neglect every other activity of devotional service. They won't associate with devotees. They won't engage in Sankirtan, either in Nam Sankirtan, a book distribution, etc. like this. So what the actual practical process of devotional service may be neglected simply for some sort of, for example, just giving one example among so many other different possibilities, but the real thing is the service attitude. And one is a verse, if one is chanting 64 rounds or reading 10 chapters of Bhagavatam a day, but at the same time he's he becomes disturbed when somebody asks him to engage in some sort of devotional service, say whatever, the temple is dirty, so somebody asks him to mop the temple, and his response is, I can't do it, I have to chant my 64 rounds. Then you can see the situation of such a devotee, or the mentality there. It's just an example, but the real thing is the service attitude. Rather, one who has an excellent service attitude, as the most many great examples, but prominently in recent history is the example in the character of Jayananda Thakur, Jayananda Prabhu. He wasn't necessarily so very learned. It's described, I think, in Radha Damodar Vilas, that he couldn't even properly chant the Gayatri mantras. He would just chant Hare Krishna in place of his Gayatri mantras because he couldn't pronounce them. So he wasn't some stereotypical, like very, just like if you think of Brahmanis, you think of somebody who's very extremely adheres to rules and regulations, very learned, etc. like this. He didn't fit this description, this stereotype, but he had a very excellent service attitude. And he's remembered, and he's more so glorified for that. So the service attitude, becoming Sevanmukh, it's this Sevanmukh attitude, it's what distinguishes not only a devotee from a non-devotee, it's what distinguishes a perfect Siddha devotee, Siddha Bhakta, from somebody who's on the stage of sadhana bhakti. In gross ways and subtle ways. There are many different facets to it, but we see that just like, for example, reading Shastra, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes we like to do it, sometimes it's an austerity to do. Sometimes, we're reading the Bhagavatam and it's very nice, we're feeling reciprocation, and we're feeling very immersed in Krishna Katha, and other times we're reading the Bhagavatam, we're falling asleep, and we're thinking like, man, it's such an austerity to read this. But for a pure devotee, it's not like that. Just like Maharaj Parikshit, he went out a whole week, he fasted, he went without sleep, he just heard the Bhagavatam. It's not something artificial necessarily, but we see that the natural attraction, that Sevanmukh, his face is turned towards the service of Lord Krishna. It's naturally become his propensity, or it's just natural for him to engage in the service of Lord Krishna. Naturally, it's almost like he can easily give up material things because they're eating, sleeping, mating, defeating. They're external to him anyway because it deals with the material body. Whereas hearing and chanting about Krishna deals with the nature of his own self. So easily Maharaj Parikshit can do these things. So this perfected service attitude is what constitutes, and you'll see even within, we're talking about Paramahamsas, even advanced devotees within our society, within the society of devotees, we'll see that people have been going on in devotional service for some time, and people who have so many different examples, just like, so many, Swabhas Prabhu, Vijay Prabhu, Bhirgupati Prabhu, so many different devotees in so many different areas of the world who have taken up such responsibility in Srila Prabhupada's mission. And we see that a very prominent character, they're doing the same thing as any other lay devotee. They may be going to the morning program, they're chanting 16 rounds, sometimes more. They're reading Srila Prabhupada's books, but specifically, the difference lies in some external difference maybe there in sadhana, just like some people, some devotees wake up at like 2 o'clock and they chant their rounds before Mangalarti. And then, whether they read during japa period. So when they get the impression, if I do like that, then I'll become, I'll very rapidly advance in devotional service. Events will be there, and you can advance like that, if you can, if you can maintain it. But the real thing the real thing is that service attitude that they've cultivated. That service attitude and that service towards not only Krishna service. Service means service to Krishna, service to Vaishnavas. You'll see that if you study, I'm just thinking of, recently I read the story of Rasikanandana Prabhu, and you see he was very inclined towards the service of Lord Krishna, but also he was very meticulous to take care of Vaishnavas as well. He fed them, he cooked for them, he fed them, he cleaned up after them, and he took the remnants as well. He was very inclined to serve Vaishnavas. So too, service attitude means not only service to Lord Krishna, it means service to Vaishnavas. That can come about in so many different ways. Feeding them, just assisting in practical affairs, having a good cooperative mood towards Vaishnavas, not giving them a hard time. Of course, it's not a perfect world, but some things come up. But the overall Krishna sees. He takes the mood that's going on. So it's a very important point, this service attitude. It's the essence of our devotional service. So this is what actually reveals Krishna unto us, ultimately, as this verse, this Atashri Krishna Nama, the verse entails. And elsewhere, there's so many different verses. This is just one. Lord Chaitanya, he quotes this verse from the Bhagavatam. Hang on. Okay, it's down here. So, this is Lord Brahma speaking. Lord Chaitanya is quoting, Atapi te deva padam vujadvaya prasada lishanu grihita evahi janati tadvam bhagavan mahimno nachanya eko pi chiram vichinvan. My Lord, if one is favored even by a slight trace of the mercy of your lotus feet, he can understand the greatness of your personality. But those who speculate to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead are unable to know you, even though they continue to study the Vedas for many years. Lord Brahma, he famously says in the 10th canto, Jananti eva janantu kim bahuktya neme prabho manasto vapusho valcho vaibhavam tavagocharaha. Lord Brahma says, there are many who say, I know everything about Krishna. Let them think that way. As far as I am concerned, I do not wish to speak much about this matter. Oh, my Lord, let me say this much. As far as your opulences are concerned, they are all beyond the reach of my mind, body, and words. So the point is this, that Lord Krishna is inconceivable, but by his revelation, by pleasing him, we come to know him, and he reveals himself unto us. And specifically, that revelation, I was just thinking during Guru Puja, it's Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoite. That it's specifically through, we pray to Srila Prabhupada's mercy and our own spiritual, the Guru's mercy, that we attain Krishna, that we satisfy the spiritual master we sing every day. Then naturally we satisfy the lotus feet, we satisfy the Lord, and we attain the lotus feet of the Lord. It's reiterated in so many different places. And I was thinking too, I was looking up before this. So this verse, I quoted previously, King Kulashekar, he prays that may I quit my body now while I can remember Lord Krishna, because otherwise at the time of death, what's the guarantee? Well, the guarantee is Srila Prabhupada's promise to us. There's so many different quotes actually from Srila Prabhupada guaranteeing, just like I sent a few devotees this quote earlier. Srila Prabhupada, he says, this is from the Leela Mrita. Adi Keshava Prabhu, he recounts this. So Srila Prabhupada said, he told him, one must be completely pure at the time of death. That means, that means you must have no other desire, completely pure of all material desires to attain Krishna at the time of death. So I asked, Adikesha Prabhu is speaking, how is it possible? I know that I won't be remembering Krishna at the time of death. I know I won't be pure. So what shall I do? He, Srila Prabhupada, said, you simply follow my instructions and I will give you that remembrance at the time of your death. So this is just as, so similarly to Srila Prabhupada, at least Mahoitsa Prabhu, he quotes often, Lord Chaitanya will force himself into your mind at the time of death. This is guaranteed by Srila Prabhupada. And what do we do? What's the process? So many different ways Srila Prabhupada explained this. A few excerpts from letters and lectures, mainly letters Srila Prabhupada. If you study along with initiation, Srila Prabhupada would often emphasize the exact same thing. He, it's almost like he had he had a generic copy of a letter that he sent out to all new initiates, saying that here are your, I've been enclosed to whatever your beads, chant 16 rounds daily. And specifically, something like this would entail: rise early, attend Mangalarti and class, chant 16 rounds, and follow the 4 regular principles without deviation. That will guarantee your spiritual success. So time and time again, just as my own spiritual master, he again emphasizes that Srila Prabhupada just emphasizes the same basic things. And you see, if you just follow the basic things, what the result is. I was just thinking, I was speaking with Devavrata Prabhu actually recently regarding Parvata Muni Prabhu. I mean, you see, mainly from what little until recent history, even when I went to Los Angeles, he's such a how to say, like, behind the scenes devotee. I went to Los Angeles, we stayed there for 3 or 4 days, and I didn't see him at all. He's just kind of an undercover devotee, but he's been there in Los Angeles for so long. Apparently, he was in San Diego before that. And yeah, he had a bakery. He was like baking. Devavrata Prabhu was like telling me that, and there's so many different. So just one example, it may not be that he was like a Vedic pundit, for instance. He may not have been such a world-conquering acharya, but we can see practically that he's being showered with Srila Prabhupada's mercy and Lord Krishna's mercy. Why? Because he stuck to the basic process. So similarly too, there's one book, as mentioned before, and Devavrata Prabhu has also mentioned this to me, that there's one book I'm just forgetting of just some. I don't mean to say lay, but some normal Mataji in devotional service, some normal rank and file devotee. She was never very some big scholar. Same thing, some big scholar, some big pundit, or very prominent. She just basically follows the Prabhupada's teachings. And you see, that book is a recollection or diary or recollection after the count of her final days in this world. And it's vividly apparent that she was showered Srila Prabhupada's mercy even at the end of her life, simply because she followed the process. So similarly to other quotes by Srila Prabhupada, please follow the regular principles strictly and chant your rounds of Hare Krishna faithfully. Attend the Arati ceremony and take prasada and work hard in the service of Krishna, and you will surely experience the bliss of perfection of life in Krishna consciousness. Another one, our request to all our students is that they daily chant at least 16 rounds of this Harinam Maha Mantra, offenselessly, following the regular principles. Their success will be assured without a doubt. And one final one, now you must agree very rigidly to very rigidly follow the rules and regulations, i.e. chanting 16 rounds of beats daily, rising early and attending Mangalarti, observing the 4 principles, attending the classes, eating only Bhagavat Prasad, as well as working under the instruction of my representatives, such as your GBC representative and the temple president. And if you follow this procedure very strictly, then your life will be glorious and we will go home back to Godhead. This I can guarantee. So there are many devotees, sometimes you see this philosophy, how is it possible? It's not possible to become Krishna conscious in one life. It may not be, but by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, by the desire of a Vaishnava, anything can happen. So Srila Prabhupada has given us his guarantee. And just recently, one final quote, I think my spiritual master sent this in the emails he sends out of Srila Prabhupada's quotes. Srila Prabhupada, he says, so I'll paraphrase it. He wrote one letter to a Mataji, and he said, there's no question of fall down. If you chant 16 rounds daily, then Krishna will personally see to it that you will never fall down. So that guarantee is there by Srila Prabhupada, by Krishna. So I can end my class here. That's basically covering all the points that are discussed in this purport. The essence of it, more or less, this whole prayer is just that simply by the mercy of Lord Krishna, we can begin to approach him. And that's reiterated in so many different ways in this verse and so many other different verses. So I can end it there and open it up for the remaining time, anything anyone may have.
So this Leaders and Fall Down is the new set of lectures that have come out.
I haven't seen that one yet.
So in that, he mentions Haridas in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes.
Yeah.
How
Junior
Haridas,
okay.
yeah. So, he mentions that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu completely rejected him on the basis of him just not even interacting with the opposite sex, but actually just having that thought.
Yeah.
And so it was just thinking, it's we're not qualified for the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in that sense, because it's when is there ever, the associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they're completely devoid of that. And so it's like, it makes sense that Srila Prabhupada is like, even with Vishnu Jan Maharaj, that instance is there where
Yeah,
like that
famously.
he felt, he did, I mean,
Yeah.
under what our understanding is that he just talked to his wife as a sannyasi. And so he committed suicide because of that. But Prabhupada said that, I'm not so strict like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it seems like, for us, it's kind of hopeless. It's like, this sex desire is just like, it's not really like I have the idea of that at some point that when I see a beautiful woman, that's even a split second thought won't be there. It's like so difficult. But it seems like, it's like Prabhupada's mercy is there that, even that's there, although we don't engage in that and we continue working in devotional service. And it's like we're granted mercy in that way.
Definitely. Absolutely. Just like one general principle is you can't directly approach Krishna. Even you can't directly approach Lord Chaitanya. It's through there's so many different things. If you want to approach Krishna, you have to go through Lord Chaitanya. If you want to approach Lord Chaitanya, you have to go through Nityananda Prabhu. And then Doya Koroshri no. Doya Koroshri Doya Koroshri Sitapati Advaita Gosai Bola Kripa Tapa Kripa Bole Pai Chaitanya Nitai. You have to get Lord Advaita Acharya's mercy, even to get Lord Nityananda Prabhu's mercy, and then you have to get the six Goswami's mercy. But really, it comes down to getting the mercy of the spiritual master. By getting the mercy of the spiritual master, the whole chain is satisfied like that. And the spiritual master, he's so merciful. I'm reading this transcendental diary by Hari Shari Prabhu, and one of the things I'm realizing is that, I mean, I've heard this before, but Srila Prabhupada never rejected anybody. Well, his Sanskrit editor, he seemingly rejected, but even then he said, you won't find a spiritual master for millions of births. At least he gave him that. He'll find a spiritual master. But we see, specifically there's so many different things, so many disciples doing such frankly, stupid things, like people taking sannyas, and then they just go away, and then they show up before Srila Prabhupada, they have long hair, and they're completely fallen for the standard of devotional service, and Srila Prabhupada, he just, he completely accepts them. Another example, I mean, Hayagriva Prabhu, he did so much work for Srila Prabhupada, especially in the matter of getting the editing the Bhagavad Gita and getting it out as the first edition. And anyway, short history, he went away from devotional service for some time, and then he saw Srila Prabhupada again in 1976 in Hawaii. He had a meeting there, and Hayagriva came before Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada is recounting there that he said, what did he say? Something along to the effect of, I was thinking how is it that my Hayagriva has gone away? And Srila Prabhupada actually began crying. Hayagriva superficially left devotional service, but Srila Prabhupada, he has such feeling for his disciples. So similarly too, so many instances of sannyasis falling down, and again, approaching Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada, he just engages them in devotional service again. Just again, another instance, one very prominent sannyasi within the movement, during Srila Prabhupada's time, he fell down. He was managing so many different things. He was helping the movement in so many different ways. And then he fell down, and Srila Prabhupada's advice to him was that, okay, you just get married, and you go on in devotional service. And then another one, he was Srila Prabhupada's servant for some time, and then, he married, and then he took sannyas, and then he fell down from sannyas. And then, he went back to being a being a brahmachari. So Srila Prabhupada asked him, so what are you? Are you a brahmachari or a grihasta? Or are you a sannyasi? What are you? So, but Srila Prabhupada never rejected anyone, Despite whatever nonsense was going on, it's amazing, actually, how tolerant Srila Prabhupada was of his disciples at the time. Hari Shari Prabhu, again, he recounts that this is his comparison. I'm just repeating it. So Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles, and he was giving an example. He was reading, actually, from the Bhagavatam of the Yamadutas arresting Ajamil. And Hari Shari Prabhu was thinking, as just like Yamaraj, who's a pure devotee of the Lord, but under him, all the Yamadutas were completely uncultured, they're ignorant, they're like savages. So similarly, too, Srila Prabhupada, he is the But because these Zamadus have a perfect leader, they're perfectly guided. So similarly to Harishar Prabhu says, it's just like that at the time with his disciples. They're very rough in character, very superficially, they're not raised in the Vedic culture, and so many different problems were there. But because the leader was perfect, and because Srila Prabhupada was so merciful, there's all perfection there. So, yeah.
Hey, Hare Krishna Prabhu, Mitravan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Dandavat Pranam, always to Guru Maharaj.
Dandavat Pranam, always to Guru Maharaj, always to Srila Prabhupada.
Hey, so, I was, thinking, that, when Prabhupada taught Jayananda Prabhu the Gayatri mantra, it was so, Jayananda Prabhu's pronunciation, Prabhupada found it so funny. It's described in the Prabhupada, the Prabhupada rolled like, he held his stomach and he laughed so loud. And then he said, do not worry, Lord Chaitanya, Krishna will accept your sincerity,
Yeah.
That, there is really amazing verse in Sanskrit, Rupa Goswami made. It's not coming to my mind right now. But the translation is that, what manliness did Ugrasena have? This verse I'm talking about?
What is this?
What manliness did,
Can you repeat that? What manliness?
Oh, yeah, you sent this to me, right? What manliness did they
Yeah,
have?
I sent it to you. I sent it to Chandan. What manliness did Ugrasena have? What piety did the hunter Khara have? What high birth did Gajendra have? But didn't the Lord shower His compassionate mercy upon all of these people?
Mm-hmm.
So Krishna is never bought by all these material qualities.
Yeah.
He's really bought by the service attitude of the devotees. And we can see that Prabhupada, although his disciples were so lacking in culture, just because they were so surrendered to him, so they surrendered, Prabhupada, basically enabled them to come to the highest platform of devotional service, which would otherwise be almost impossible to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading this quote to Avaduta Chandra Prabhu from the Prabhupada Leela Amrita yesterday. It's really, really amazing. The devotees were asking Srila Prabhupada, this is Vrindavan, and in Vrindavan everything is supposed to be amazing and nice, but why is it that Vrindavan is a desert right now, is becoming, and you predicted that Vrindavan will become more and more of a desert,
Mm-hmm.
So then Prabhupada replied, where he said that, where is this? I'm just pulling it up on my phone. Anyway, unable to find it. But, Prabhupada says, I'll basically just, whatever it's called, I'll just say, paraphrase it. So Prabhupada told them, oh yeah, I found it. So the devotees questioned Prabhupada, wasn't the West more impious than Vrindavan? Yes, Prabhupada said, I came to you in the West and you did not know anything about Krishna. You did not even know that these things were bad, meat eating and illicit sex. But when I told you to stop, you did it. But this is Krishna's land, Vrindavan. And they are doing these things here. Therefore, it is even worse. And they're being punished directly by Krishna.
Yeah.
Because they're being directly punished by Krishna because they've gotten too puffed up. We already know this, that, and the other thing. We are such high birth, this and that. Indians also, such high birth, this and that. Then why is India the biggest exporter of beef? Because they're neglecting the orders of Krishna. So just by following the orders of Srila Prabhupada, we can attain the highest thing. Prabhupada literally gave us everything. There's nothing Prabhupada didn't give us,
Mm-hmm.
So if we simply follow Prabhupada's instructions, we can easily go back home, back to Garad in this life. And so I just wanted to say that.
Jai. Thank you for that. There's so many other different quotes that echo the same sentiment. Only about this idea that you can possess so much material qualification, but it doesn't matter. Just by Mahotsa, you speaking, there's so many different verses like this, but there's one in Prahlad Maharaj's prayers. It's interesting and somewhat funny actually. He says he's before Lord Nrsimhadev, and he says that I won't say the Sanskrit because there's not so much time. He says there's so many different demigods, they couldn't satisfy with the prayers. What's the use of me offering prayers because I'm born in a demoniac family? Then Prahlad Maharaj thinks, well, this is what Gajendra did this, And he was born as an elephant, and he was able to satisfy the Lord. So I may as well offer up my prayers just for my own purification. So he says that not all yogic strength, intelligence, high beauty, birth and high fame, none of this is. He can't understand the Lord by any of these qualifications. So that was just coming to my mind. So
It's very easy to hear all these different excerpts of the mercy of the spiritual master, and completely take advantage of that mercy. I mean, wouldn't it be non-different than Nam No Balad Yeshe Papa Buddhi? Chanting on the strength, sinning while chanting on the strength of the holy name.
well, the spiritual master is not stupid.
Yeah.
He's not stupid. He knows. Krishna gives him the intelligence. It's just like, whatever. Somebody's a rascal his whole life, and the expectation is like, in other words, it's a very different experience if somebody goes on sinning or does whatever nonsense in the name of devotional service with the idea that, my guru will just save me, versus one, and there have been examples they may have fallen from the standard of devotional service, they may have been repentant about that, but at the end they're saved by the spiritual master. But their mood is repentance, just as Krishna says in the 11th canto, the Uddhava, that just shortening it, one may fall down for the standard of devotional service. One may fall down, but if he regrets it and repents about it, then it's not an impediment, and it again becomes elevated. So it's the same thing with the spiritual master. If it's a question, if there's not sincerity there, then it's the same thing as Nam No Balad Yeshe. The thing is, you don't even get the mercy of the spiritual master at that point. So some conception could be there, but yeah. And then I'll go to the Mahdi.
Mitravan Prabhu, I just have a question and a comment. You referred to King Kulak Shekhar as being an Alvar.
Alavar, yeah.
Yeah, what is that about?
Alavar is basically it's just like there's we have our Guru and Parampara. So an Alavar are the acharyas before Ramanuja Acharya. They're Sri Vaishnava acharyas that came before. They're Ramanuja's preceptors, basically. And I think there's 12 Alavars. It was just mentioned recently. I'm not so familiar, but he's one of them. He's very prominent, actually.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
So.
And just my comment, I always appreciate your classes, and I was hearing a recent lecture, it wasn't recent, but I heard it recently. It was a class by Sura Prabhu, the BBT man from LA, and he said what consists of a good class is shloks, quotes, and jokes. And I feel like you always have those in your classes, so thank you.
He gives really fired up classes, Sura. Okay. I'm gonna allow a little extra.
Earlier in class, you were mentioning with meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, that thinking of the Lord's lotus feet we can do immediately, but meditating on the Lord's feet takes time.
Yeah.
But what is that meditation on the Lord's lotus feet? Is it his actual feet, or is it the devotional service? What is that meditation?
Well, in the beginning, from my own understanding of what I've read, is in the beginning, the meditation is more or less on the service, and therefore commonly you hear devotees, they'll express this complaint or concern that I'm doing the service, but I'm not thinking of Krishna. That's because the thinking of Krishna, it comes later in devotional service. So specifically the thinking, smaranam, this remembrance, technical term, that means it could be the thinking of the lotus feet themselves. It could be thinking of the pastimes of Krishna. It could absorbed in remembrance of Krishna's name, fame, etc. like this, along with whatever service you're engaged in. This comes later in devotional service. It's a higher stage. But initially in the beginning, the service is there when we execute the service. And later, we still execute the service, but there's more, just simply put, we become more Krishna conscious. The consciousness of Krishna is there. The consciousness of Krishna's name, Krishna's fame, there's lotus feet, so many different things like that. So, is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing that I had a question of was you were mentioning about how, we can become Krishna consciousness within a second through that sincerity. But then you also mentioned that it's Krishna's grace that allows us to be able to release those material desires. So I guess, is it our sincerity guarantees that grace from Krishna?
Yeah, you could say it to an extent. Again, it's not mechanical, but this is what's given out of Srila Prabhupada. It's just it's open for us. The grace is always open for us. It's just, First canto, 9th chapter, somewhere Srila Prabhupada explains this. It's just like the sun is shining everywhere equally. It's not that the sunshine is being reserved for anyone, but still some places are shady, some places are full of sun. So it's according to our own, since you could say, if we're sincere to step in the sunlight, then we get the benefits of sunlight. So it's down to that. The mercy is there. It's just a question of, and of course that's said, and Srila Prabhupada did say that multiple times. But generally, the process of devotional service is such that it's gradual, because people who immediately try to become fully surrendered, and it's just difficult. It's difficult to even the idea of just doing everything unconditionally for Krishna service. Unconditionally executing whatever service you're asked to do without any without any aversion to that service is very, very, very difficult. So it's possible, but it's difficult. So therefore, usually it's gradually. So I think one other Mataji had. Can I allow?
I'm not understanding. So for us to make it back to Krishna at the time of death, we have to be completely pure.
Yeah, that's the general understanding. Yeah. Go on.
So even if we are following the principles and, engaging in service and chanting 16 rounds, if I was to die tomorrow, I wouldn't make it back to Krishna, because I'm not pure. So it's I'm confused on how that.
It depends upon one's own situation, one's relation, the situation with the Guru, with the situation with Krishna. The general understanding from Shastra is that you have to be completely pure to worship, to attain the lotus feet of Krishna. But there's stipulations and there's tail riders. Just like nobody in this age of Kali is qualified spiritually, but Lord Chaitanya came. Nobody can attain. It's very difficult to come to the platform, even that Lord Chaitanya gave. But Srila Prabhupada made things easy for us. It's just I think he was here in Atlanta actually. Srila Prabhupada, he got out of Vyasa-san, very good illustration, and he said the same thing actually, something similar to that. Unless you were completely pure, completely 100% liberated from material desires, completely 100% pure, then we can go back to God. He said something like this, and then you could see that the crowd of devotees was kind of despondent. Because the implication is, if you're 1% not pure, then you're not going to go back to Godhead. And so Srila Prabhupada, he kind of sensed this, and so he said, he took a few steps, and he said, okay, 90%. then the devotees came a little more okay, well, there's some allowance there. And then Srila Prabhupada said 80%. And then he said 70%, but no more, at least 70%. And then so the idea is some fault may be there, because there's always some fault in Kali Yuga, Nobody can practice, Srila Prabhupada said nobody can follow strictly, neither I can nor you. Therefore, criticizing is just going on. Nobody can be a perfect Brahmana, nobody can be a perfect wife, nobody can be a perfect anything, because that's the nature of Kali Yuga. Some allowances there. But the point is that we try our best, and the mercy of the Guru, the mercy of the spiritual master is there. Not in a sort of sentimental take advantage kind of way, but they cover whatever faults may be there of the age. So succinctly if specifically the die to tomorrow thing, that's a more elaborate description, because there is actually descriptions of Srila Prabhupada. Some boy left his body. In 1968, I think he was hit by a car or something like that. And Srila Prabhupada lamented over that, saying saying something to the effect, I forget the contents of the letter, but it was almost as if, he couldn't attain perfection. He didn't practice enough, So that may have been there. I don't know the specific situation. That's a more elaborate answer. But the real thing is the intention and the sincerity. If you're taking it to Krishna consciousness with I'm going to I'm going to back to God in this life, then it's doubtful that Krishna and Guru wouldn't reciprocate with that if the intention is to become pure from material desire. Because the process is lifting us up. Even at the time of death, not everybody is completely pure, but the Guru lifts us out of this material world. He throws a rope. So
I'm just going to make it really quick.
Yeah.
I was just going to say in regards to both those things. First thing is in regards to remembering Krishna, the chanting of japa in the morning is your chanting of 16 rounds have to
Yeah.
be quality also, not just that 16 rounds half asleep. It's not even sleeping, just half asleep. Sometimes most devotees sleep half asleep. They say, and then when you approach them, they say, I'm not sleeping. So even the half asleep chanting, it should be attentive. You should be aware of that, and that will help when you're doing service over time. Kind of be easier to remember Krishna, because if you become pure Cheto Darpana Marjana, right? The mind is, the heart is cleansed of all that dirt. And then in regards to if we die tomorrow, well, we take the position of Bhaktivinoda Thakur also. Let me be born in the house of a Vaishnava as a little insect or something like that. So then it's not such a worry actually. There's no worry to like, okay, if I die tomorrow, so what? Hopefully Krishna, like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna promises in that way that that we get that opportunity in the next life. But we continue performing sincerely that okay, maybe that's 50%. I might get to go even if I die tomorrow. But actually every day we try to like center around, and we take the mood of Bhaktivinoda Thakur as like, if I do die, then please Krishna, let me be born as
Yeah,
a
that's true,
the insignificant insect in the house of a Vaishnava.
That's true, yeah. And even if we have that mood that I'm going to die tomorrow, that's very good. That's what Srila Prabhupada says. So if we can actually cultivate that, that's very good. Okay, we got to stop. So, Srimad Bhagavatam.